Walkos, but that's okay. It happens often.
I do it every time, but I'm such a fan of your work, and I wanted to have you on and talk a little bit about not just why you are such a dedicated, not just researcher, but somebody that puts yourself out there with information that likely does not make the powers that be happy, but where does that come from? What's a little bit about your background that led you to being such a prolific researcher for good?
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, really what came about for me to kind of step forward and put myself out there, as you say, was COVID, which is what, like, I think woke up a lot of people and really let me know the type of like danger that basically a way of life in the world is in at this point. I mean, I go way back researching this stuff without sharing it, clear back to 9/11. You know, I'm
Right.
42, going on 42. So I clearly remember that day and remember looking into the events behind it and kind of everything that's transpired since, and have been following that. And I think that's a huge piece of the puzzle people need to really kind of start with. I mean, information war goes back much further, but that was kind of like an unveiling in my mind. Like, hey, the NWO is actually a real thing, and they're doing it, and they're going for it. And a lot of people will kind of poo-poo that as a concept, but there's a literature, there's a history of this. If you actually know where to look and read about it, that there actually is a faction of internationalists that are trying to take over the world. I mean, to put it simply. But when it came to me saying, hey, I got to kind of step from behind my Twitter account and put my face out there and talk about it, it was COVID and what I saw transpire, and because I had kids as well, because I would have felt ashamed of myself if I didn't step up and say something about what I saw going on. When they look back one day, they're going to see that I actually tried to say something about it, whether it made a difference or not. But courage is something that's important these days that we sorely lack as a society. I mean, there's so much to go over in regards to that. It's just that people need to realize that we are being lied to on a scale that's never been seen before, like on a daily basis. It's just mind-boggling to me that there is a percentage of the populace, which is a large percentage, that kind of gobbles it all up and eats it all up every single day. Like you said, everybody hated Kamala Harris going back to 2020 when she ran, but no one really. She was like dead last in the polls. She had like 2% of the vote. And then all of a sudden, because they realized they had a dead man walking as a president, that they needed to have somebody step in. And this is the same party that cries, we have to protect our democracy and all this stuff. And there was no democracy with her stepping in right now. There's no primary happening. And like you said, all of a sudden, you saw the apparatus kind of jump into place and just fall in line and start painting her as some type of, champion for a little man. And like, they didn't even get into her history of what she did, but she was a DA in California and putting people behind bars for marijuana. And there's all kinds of scandals behind it, but just the way that they snapped it. Now we see it with the polls. That's one thing I've noticed lately is that it's kind of like a social engineering trick that we see. You can't trust any of these polls. The 2016 election taught us that everybody was Hillary Clinton in a landslide, right? So we knew that they were lying about those polls. And people who answer polls aren't really the real people, right? Like who the hell is answering these? If they would come to me to answer the poll, I wouldn't want to talk to them or give my honest opinion about things. So, but you can tell there's like this site called Polymarket where you can kind of bet on who's going to win things like that. They have her like 7 percentage points ahead of Trump right now. Out of nowhere, you see all the polls saying just overnight, just flip. And that is a mind control technique to create a perception in the popular mind that, it's also a voter suppression technique as well, in my opinion, because they're putting that out there in the public mind. All these media channels are blasting it out. People are saying, oh, well, it looks like she's going to win, or just buying the propaganda that people actually like her. She has to have Megan Thee Stallion come on and do a concert for people to show up to see her. It's just, the thing is that people are they're so like stuck on Trump, like Trump. I don't think he's like the end all be all. I don't put my faith in really any politicians, but I did really wake up to the fact that there's something about this guy. They just do not want him stepping in the office. He put a kink in their NWO internationalist plans in 2016, And they saw that as a major threat to their agenda, and they are following through with that. I mean, just think about this. Somebody just tried to blow his head off on live television, and it's out of the news cycle now. No one even cares anymore. You know what I mean? Or we have deranged idiots saying that he should have been killed. You know, it just gives you an insight into the mind control that is happening on a daily basis. And I just can't wrap my head around how people don't see through it, you know, because they're so ideologically captured that anybody but Trump. I mean, you could roll out Hitler at this point, and people would say anybody but Trump. You know what I mean? It's just crazy to me that like they see him as a clear and present danger. He had 4 years. You know, it ain't like he was a dictator at that point. The economy was doing good. You know, before COVID happened.
Right.
And I'm of the mind of thinking that, like, I asked a lot of people this. I'll ask you this: do you think if Hillary Clinton would have won this 2016 election, do you think that COVID would actually have happened? War games leading up to it as well, besides of that 201. You know, we had Crimson Contagion, which was the biggest multi-state live exercise where they were getting to the localities, you know, on a local level, basically prepping people's minds for what was to come and telling them how they needed to react and roll out these different type of measures like social distancing and things like that.
Right.
People really need to take a look at that. I've written several articles on my Substack detailing those war games and what, you know, people like Bill Gates and Fauci were saying. I mean, we have Fauci in 2017 saying unequivocally on tape, we are going to encounter a pandemic under the Trump administration.
Right.
Now, you can take that as, oh, he's just, you know, fear-mongering, but the way that he said it, and then when you combine that with the other warnings that Bill Gates and all these other highly influential people were doing around that time, it becomes clear as day that this was actually a pandemic. They were doing this in order to basically do a gigantic transfer of wealth that's never been seen before. And they got all this data on us now. And the thing that kind of frightens me is that they're not going to stop there. You know, they're already talking about bird flu and how given multi-billion-dollar contracts to Moderna to come out with mRNA vaccines for bird flu. I mean, we're just in a giant mess right now. And going back to your original question, the election is almost a distraction as well. You know what I mean? Because
I agree.
You know, I'm a little bit black pill when it comes to this. When we start thinking about the stuff that's happened and what's going to happen, I think we're in store for a really rocky next few months leading up to the election. Well, I mean, you said it great. I mean, you pretty much laid it out right there. I mean, they saw that Trump was a threat to the agenda that was going smoothly through Obama's administration. You know, I mean, he kind of kicked it in high gear. There was a cult of personality around him. A lot of people liked him, even though if you look at his policies, he was killing United States citizens with drones. He expanded up several different wars in all over the world. Look at Libya. Look what happened. There's so many things. Syria, I mean, which was an intelligence operations.
Right. People
need to understand that the terrorist organizations were created by Western intelligence, starting with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan.
Right.
Whenever the Russians were in Afghanistan, we went and we trained these freedom fighters, is what they call it. Whenever they're being used for our purposes, whenever they get ideas of their own, they become terrorists. But we trained a huge network. I mean, this is very important to understand in the context of where we're at now in history, the war on terrorism and all that, what happened to 9/11. The seeds were planted back then whenever they were fighting them and training these freedom fighters, they said, in Afghanistan. And they use these guys are like on the bench. That's what they did in Syria too. So they created ISIS as well. So they have them and they will arm them and they'll do it under false pretenses. And then these people, they give them all these guns and they say, hey, well, no, we're going to actually create our own caliphate now. You know, we have all the weapons that you gave us and we're going to go ahead and destroy the Middle East. Doing it on behalf of intelligence agencies, whether they know or not, the people on the ground, but the high level individuals who run these organizations like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and all these things, they were in bed with the intelligence agencies, Western intelligence, the whole time. And people need to know that what they're seeing is largely a gigantic illusion, going back to the World Economic Forum and the UN and all this. climate change comes into play as well. They know that they can't go ahead and say, hey, you know what, we need to reduce the population and we want to transfer all their wealth, all about the middle class of the United States, which is the most important class of individuals on earth to support freedom, we need to haul that out. We need to level the playing field. It's really more of a class war than anything. They want to make it the rich versus the poor. But we can't go out and say that we want to actually reduce the population. That we'll say it in their white papers and various books, but public facing, they're going to say it's because the humans are the enemy. We're destroying Mother Gaia. We have to reduce carbon and whatever it may be. There's all types of excuses they make that give them the pretext that they need in order to legitimate the plans that they have in place, basically. That's, exactly right. And it's all laid out. If you have the time and you have the inclination to go and, like you said, read about these things, there's a large, long literature going clear back to post-World War II that lays out all these plans. People don't realize that the Cold War, the things that occurred during the Cold War are now coming fruition, like the mind control programs and things that they were implementing as an excuse because we had to keep up with the Russians. You know what I mean? Right. The Russians are doing this, so we can do this. Oh, so because the Russians are going after Nazi scientists, we can go get Nazi scientists and bring them here and then place them in high-ranking positions in various organizations within the United States government, like NASA. It was based on a Nazi scientist, and people can't wrap their head around it because the propaganda and the mind control techniques have been basically, there's a science behind it here that people don't understand. I was thinking about this book earlier that I was reading that I really encourage your viewers to check out. It's called The People Shapers. It was released, I think, in 1968 by a guy named Vance Packard. Okay, he is a sociologist, and he has another book called The Hidden Persuaders. He's kind of known for. But this book, if you want to understand the history of weaponized psychology, behavioral psychology, read that book because he shows you exactly what they were doing with B.F. Skinner and like all this. There's a whole lineage that occurred that was specifically funded by the government in order to mass control, mind control, and behavioral control the United States government or people with the United States. And also now it's expanded, to Europe and all over the world because of the internet and the communication revolutions. But people just need to quit taking things at face value because it's almost people like to get gaslit. Like they want gaslit at this point. You know what I mean? Right. Like they'll just take whatever excuse they'll throw at them because they don't want to face reality and experience cognitive dissonance and think that, oh, I might have been wrong about this thing the whole time, Right. And then it goes back to like the psychology of that is with the COVID vaccine, right? People still think that thing saved millions of lives. They still think that it kept them out of the hospital, even though there's been reports that lots of people are dying, maimed, injured with that. But they don't want to face the fact that they were duped and they potentially put themselves in danger and their family in danger. So they'd rather just continue on going with the narrative because it's too much of an ugly fact to look in the mirror and say, wow, I actually fell for this. And there are people who are brave enough to realize that and speak out and more, but not enough in order to make the changes that we need to make. But the mind control is something people really need to look into. And it's not like voodoo, there's a science behind it. And it has been weaponized so strongly with the internet that we're immersed in it on a daily basis, and you don't have the discernment to understand what's really going on. It's easy to fall for things, and you can't blame most people because they just want to go to work, raise their kids, have a happy life, have some beers on the weekend, go to some games, just live their life. Right. But meanwhile, behind the scenes, we're having weapon-grade mass communications just pointed at us every single day, and basically trying to submit our will to them. Right. One thing I think we should be talking about is sovereignty, not only as the United States, but as individuals, because the globalists or internationalists, whatever you want to call it, they hate that word because they know it goes back to the founding fathers and those principles laid out there. And that is the enemy of these people because they don't have any allegiance to any country. They want to essentially be able to put in a techno control grid over the entire world. They're hollowing out developing countries. Everything's done under the guise of we're trying to help these poor people, but they're really just exploiting them, taking all of their wealth out of their country and saying it's like because we have to stop climate change or whatever excuse they have, du jour, right? So people just need to say no and realize that, hey, admit you've been duped and join our side because, we forgive you. We want you on our side.
I feel the same way.
As not only Americans, but like as just people in the world overall, because a lot of people are seeing it, but it's not to the point where I think we can make the giant change or take the giant step that we need to, because they have shown that they will do the craziest shit possible to get their agenda through. I mean, again, they tried to blow Trump's head off on live television.
Yes.
They literally tried to kill him. I mean, going back to JFK, just think of what the fallout of that would have been if that actually
I know. Go ahead.
I think he is a major problem too, because he was underneath Cheadle. You know what I mean? They were, two peas in a pod. So he's just covering for them. And there's even mainstream media reports that are looking at the events and like the dereliction of duty essentially that occurred on that day. And they're even saying, this doesn't make sense. Like my theory is they knew this kid was up to something. They either groomed him or allowed it to happen. And they thought, hey, if he makes it happen and kills him, good. You got to ask yourself always, who benefits? Who benefits if he gets his head blown off?
Yeah.
All the problems they've had with Trump goes away if that happens. You know what I mean? All of
and
them.
Us. And the whole MAGA
Or
movement.
the RNC, right? So if that would have happened, the whole Republican Party would be in disarray. They would probably have Nikki Haley stepping up to come in or some shit like that. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like the timing of the events and the dereliction of duty on that day just stinks to high hell. And the problem is that we're never going to really know, just like with JFK. We know, but we're never going to really get the facts because they're never going to release it. It's going to be a thing that we argue about 50 years from now. And it's just a way to divide and obfuscate, what's really going on. And then they use conspiracy theory. They weaponize that term as well. And that comes from JFK.
I know.
That's where that literally comes. There's a memo from the CIA when Jim Garrison was getting too close to the truth. They said, hey, we need to send this out to our partners in the media through Operation Mockingbird. Use this particular term called conspiracy theory that you need to repeat over and over again ad nauseum to discredit anything that's counter to the official narrative. And here we are in 2024, and it's still used and it's still weaponized. And people repeat this, and they don't even understand that they're repeating CIA propaganda. And that just shows you how much of a stranglehold like people's minds are in when it comes to these types of things. Well, that's my whole thing is you have to know history to understand the present. And we're in such like a vacuum on a daily basis with information that, I make a point to try and seek out things that kind of blow up the worldview or the narrative that's been told to us throughout history, because that is one way to reach people and be like, well, if they lied about that, well, there's got to be some other things going on, right? Like there's so many things, but the truth and reconciliation idea is a good idea, but how do we get it to be truly independent is the problem.
Right, yeah.
Because like you said, the individuals, the deep state, so to speak, the bureaucracy, the people we've elected are not in control. People need to really know that. It is intelligence community that is doing this. Homeland Security came out of the Patriot Act. It didn't exist before.
Nope.
The homeland is a word the Nazis used. Okay, that's something that I was just watching something as well that I'll bring up. It was a documentary, and I was thinking about posting this online about the Nazi Olympics that happened. Okay, remember it went to Germany, and it was whenever Hitler was coming to power, and he seized upon it to become a gigantic propaganda event to basically change the way people viewed Germany in the world at that point, because their economy was in shambles and they were coming out of the Weimar Republic, that sort of thing. And he seized upon that and created a huge spectacle and basically ritualized it. And that is the source of our Olympics today now that you realize it. Because before then, they didn't have this gigantic seized upon of opportunity by the countries, whoever are hosting them, to create like rituals and all kinds of weird things to control the way that people perceive things. And I just thought that was an interesting tidbit, because people think of, it's just only Olympics, but you can go trace it directly back to Hitler's Olympics and how that changed the way that they presented. Not only that, but a lot of the spectacle that we see now, because they basically weaponized like their messaging and propaganda, and really it did work on a world scale. Hitler was Time Magazine's Man of the Year twice. You know what I mean? Before he decided to try to take over the world.
He sold out Madison Square Garden.
Yeah. I mean, people don't understand the history of like the Nazis and how close the United States actually were and still is to that ideology. People within the IC community and throughout our government, there's definitely traces of the Nazis still left today in 2024 that people just don't want to even entertain, because we've been he's the big bad wolf, big bad enemy, but what about us going and getting all their doctors and stuff and bringing them over here under assumed names that are living among us? You know what I mean? Yeah. There's no culpability for any of that. They helped create the most destructive weapon that's ever been created with the atom bomb and nuclear bombs. You know what I mean? Like, it just blows my mind that we're so ignorant of the history, and we have it all at our fingertips if we really want to seek it out and look at it. But people just live, like I said, in this cultural vacuum where it's reactionary on a daily basis, whatever the next thing is online or Twitter. I'm actually guilty of it too. We all are, because we see it and it outrages us, but you have to look at it into a larger context of history to understand what happened there. There's always a linear events that happen over time that lead up to the things that we're seeing right now. You just have to take the time to try and understand it and blank your mind out from any preconceived notions that you have of history, because anything you're going to be taught in public school, that history is all basically lies. All it is propaganda and lies. And we need to reconcile with the fact that we're ignorant of our own history as well. You get back to first principles and actually talk about the Constitution and why it was so important and why people still want to come here and mass migrate here, because they know that it's the only beacon in the world that actually has freedom of speech and tries to live by these principles. The people here do, but our government has completely abandoned them. It's definitely being scrubbed on it. I mean, I was just telling my wife about this the other day too, because I was watching a segment on the Wayback Machine. Segment on it, which I use and love, because that's really the only way you can access some of this information to prove that it existed in the first place. But they've been under attack too with archive.org. Now they're trying to take them offline because it's such a robust source of information that has been basically occulted and shoved away from the surface internet. But yeah, they're doing it constantly, like especially with government websites, like certain things that you think would be benign that they shouldn't be, moving to other pages or whatever. You get on there and it's 404, it's gone. Like just like documents are, like I said, benign, but they are a piece of the puzzle. So they're actively trying to rewrite history, like you said. And thank God we have things like Wayback Machine, archive.org, and I use a lot of, books are a major key of source of all mine, right? Like imagine that. There's these things that contain information. Like you go back to the appendix, you go back to the notes and the references, and that I love reading through references, and then sit on my computer, search that reference. The way I can get a real strong picture of what this book is, whatever it is I'm talking about. You know what I mean? Because they give you everything, and there are other ways online, like. There's this website called Anna's Archive. I don't know if you've heard of this, but it is an open source website where basically you can get any book that's ever been written on there. If you go on there and you can download them in PDF formats. A lot of them are from LibGen and like all these open source freedom sites basically that try to get information out to people. But that isn't something a lot of people are even aware of. They think, well, I don't want to pay $24 for this book, and you probably would never get it. But I'm telling you, your listeners, you just go to just Google it. It'll come up. It's called Anna's Archive, and it's unbelievable source of information.
Oh, wow.
What people are guilty of doing is not having their own sovereign morality. They're passing the moral buck, so to speak, on these amorphous entities like government or institutions.
Right.
Like look at COVID as an example. They just say, hey, we're just going to trust the experts, trust the science. Things like they don't know that like those experts in science, they are completely corrupted and paid. They are paid off to the nth degree, and they have all kinds of incentives to stick to the narrative, and not only monetary but social incentives too. It doesn't have to be like some grand conspiracy where people are sitting in a back room, rubbing their hands together, a smoky room, saying, hey, we're going to do this. It's built into the system where people know if they're in a position where they're reliant for their income, if they step out of line, their livelihood may be, at risk. They have kids and things like that they have to pay for, and it just becomes a thing where people fall in line, and the conspiracy is a conspiracy of silence. What happens because people are too afraid to step out of line. And my point is why I step out and talk about it is because people need to use their voice and talk about what they think is true, and not be afraid of being shamed or being called a conspiracy theorist or whatnot. And we have to reach across the aisle, so to speak. I consider myself an independent. A lot of people put me in the conservative sphere just because of some of the content that I post. But everybody needs to be independent and try and talk to people who disagree with you, because you can get through to them. It could be one little thing could spark a fire in their mind, that could lead them down a road to say, oh yeah, okay, he was right about this. They might be lying about all this, but we've been balkanized essentially by the government and the intelligence agencies. We just think about what's happened. Since 2012. First, it was Me Too. Right. Men, going after men for which they should, but
it was so hijacked. It was so extreme. Then it was running out of CAA. We went from believe all women to men can be women in a period of like 6-7 years, right? It's true. It's true.
The same people who are bitching about men being sexual predators are now convinced that men can have babies.
Right.
Like, that shows you the delusional aspect of this in the way that people's minds and sense of reality can be hijacked, and they did it to divide us. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And they'll just roll out the next thing that's going to be divisive. It's not just Democrat, Republican, it's men, women, straights, gays, all this. You see that it's just the balkanization and trying to create infighting. That way our eyes off the ball, and they're able to continue hollowing out the middle class and eliminating sovereignty, so that ultimately there can be a world government, which is the ultimate goal. They'll never call it a world government, but it is a world government that's already taking shape. The Patriot Act is what kind of kicked it all off.
I agree.
And that's probably the worst act ever made in the history of Congress. I mean, it completely wiped out, several key rights that we have.
Right.
And people aren't even aware that there's gigantic buildings in Utah right now that are sucking up all the information, all the text, all the calls, probably this phone call right now.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Where they're putting it in some servers, and then they can go back if say they find somebody that they don't like, that they want to destroy, okay? Right. Whether it's politically or whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. All this information has been stored and saved. They can go back through your internet history, whatever it may be, find something that they think that would be used, that they could weaponize against you, and then roll it out on you. We've seen it happen over and over again.
Yep.
And they can do it with impunity as well, which is the crazy part, because it's law that they can do that. Look how they went after Trump with his team in 2016 with the FISA, right?
Right.
All the logic behind it is total bullshit. They said that because they're tapping, what was his name, Carter Page's phone, anybody who comes in contact with him, they can then, by extension, tap their phones and monitor their communications. And that's how they drummed up that Michael Flynn stuff, in order to start the whole Russiagate thing. That is manifest right in front of our eyes of how they do weaponize and do this sort of thing. And yet people, because of the strong propaganda leading up to 2016 and the way that they made Trump seem like he is the worst person who's ever walked the earth, and people bought it, hook, line, and sinker.
Right.
I don't think he's like a great guy. I think, but
he is
not,
who he is.
yeah, he is who he is. And I'm not trying to be friends with him. That's the thing.
Right.
Democrats and like, they want to be friends with their leaders. They want to think that they're cool. I want to look at your policies. I want to know what you're going to do from a policy perspective. And we're sitting here several months from the election. We have Kamala Harris, who is now the nominee. She wasn't even voted in for it. Everybody hated her. Now they all love her. As you go to her website, there's not one policy position on her website. We don't even know what she believes. You know what I mean? We don't even know what she's going to do. Well, we have an idea of what she's going to do. It's not going to be good, but
yeah.
Just to think about that like we are just a few months from a major presidential election, and one of the leading candidate for Democrats doesn't even state any policy positions. They don't even need policies now. It's
or to give press conferences.
It happened to the little guy, and it does happen. All these whistleblowers dying too, the Boeing situation.
Yeah.
I mean, people just need to wake up and realize that like there is a group of individuals, an entity, if you will, that's worldwide.
Yep.
And like I said, you can trace it if you take the time to read about it, but they are trying to take over the world, basically. I mean, they really, really are. I just don't know how to put it any other way. Like, they are implementing all of these measures and shipping people in illegally to all these countries, Western countries. That should be something that people should say, hey, what's going on here? Why? I just posted something today that New York, they spent $5 billion last year on illegal immigration to house these mostly men in five-star hotels, give them cards, Visa cards with cash on it. Meanwhile, our veterans are dying on the street and not getting the proper care. They went to war and tried to do the right thing, and they're just getting completely ignored. And we're importing people in order to create civil war conditions, because people, they know that there's only a certain point to what people are going to, look at what's happening in the UK, is going to deal with this stuff. I mean? That right there is all the proof that anybody should need that there is something extremely nefarious going on here. Why are they letting people the same people who are worried about disease and catching COVID are okay with people being trafficked into the country without even being stopped to see if they have any diseases or anything like that. Yep. It shows you the hypocrisy, and that they don't really care about what they say they care about front facing to the public. You know what I mean? It's all about pushing a particular agenda. Why is the UN and all these nonprofits facilitating illegal immigration into our country? But I mean, that is the golden question, right? Like that's traitorous for them to do that. Not to mention that all these women and girls are being raped on the way there as well. They don't care. With AI right now, the requirements of what they are planning on doing, creating these huge server farms, basically, they're like cities, basically, are going to require massive amounts of electricity just to run. And we're like going headfirst into this. Everybody's on board with AI. I mean, some of it's very fascinating. I mess around with some of the chat GPT but we're going headfirst into just giving them the keys to the kingdom as far as techno-fascism is concerned. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They always talk about public-private, right? Partnerships. That's like their stakeholder capitalism. People forget that the definition of fascism is whenever the government and private industry collude for their own ends. And that's exactly what it is fascism, what's happening. Fascism isn't what Antifa calls like a Trump supporter. That's not a fascist, right? People that, like, again, are so disconnected from these terms historically and what they really do mean and why they were brought forth and people were called fascists, that they're just so confused about everything right now that it's a deliberate way to fracture people's minds. That way they don't have the bandwidth in order to even have conversations that we have right now. They don't even have your foot in the front door to get there, because they're so worried about TikTok and transgender rights and abortion and like all these boutique issues that they glom onto that become their single voter issues, when we're getting completely the country's being taken away right underneath everybody's noses while we're just we have nurses doing TikTok dances.
Yeah, and we're fighting amongst each other when, there's nothing you or me or that guy or this girl or whatever are doing that, is really the problem. The problem is certainly from above, and it's by design, like you've said this whole time, that is the way that they keep control of the narrative, which is why I believe that you're one of the people out there who's actually trying to break their narrative. Of course, then they don't like us, but I really don't care because I really feel like we're in that.
Another aspect of this track and trace that you mentioned that I wanted to bring up is that they're doing this on nature level too. So they have nature accounting. Have you heard of this? The UN has. So they're already rolling this out into what they call developing countries, where they are basically assigning values to trees and watersheds and things like that. And it's called nature accounting, where they're using this method of accounting in order to essentially steal people's land and take over it because they need to conserve, right? Like the only thing they're conservative about is, what they want to steal. Other than that, conservatives are evil to them. But they literally, I would encourage your listeners to check that out. Just go to like the UN website and search nature accounting, and you will be blown away about the literature and the things that they already have in place that they're implementing in other countries that they want to bring to the West in order to basically seize control of all natural resources, track, trace, database, that sort of stuff. The U.S. government is the biggest employer on earth, right? I mean, that's really so many people's livelihood, and they have vested interest in this all the industrial complexes now, people are, even though they might be against it, their livelihood depends upon it, so they won't speak out about it. That's why we have all these Lockheed Martin stocks and everything shooting up the last couple of weeks, because they're preparing for war in the Middle East, and that's exactly what they're going to do. And they've been preparing for this for years. You had what happened in Israel, which I don't know if you noticed this. There was a coming out of COVID, there was a huge truth movement that people got along and they were all on the same page. And it was something that was formidable. Yeah. Because they know that the issue with Israel and Palestine is such a divisive issue. Right. Look what happened there. Within a matter of days, people who are talking on the same side when we're talking about COVID and the civil liberties were fractured because some people are, all on side of Gaza and the Palestinians. A lot of people are on Israel, and they know that is just a way to separate people and create issues. And whether it's the government. It's not people like when people hear somebody talk about Israel, they think they're talking about all Jewish people. We're talking about the government that is doing the same thing the government's doing to us. That whole event there stinks to high hell. They knew that they were going to be doing that they were planning to do that a year ahead of time. It's the same thing with what happened with the Trump with the Trump assassination attempt, and a lot of things, they let it happen. People don't understand. Governments will sacrifice their citizens for a larger agenda. This has been going on through history. Look up Operation Gladio. NATO put undercover terrorist organizations all throughout Europe to bomb and kill innocent civilians in order to push their agenda through. And that was uncovered in the 90s. It happened for 20, 30 years without anybody even right under people's nose. So people have to realize that our governments, not just ours, but all of them are willing to kill innocent people in order to achieve agendas that they want. Operation Northwoods is another good example. They brought it to the president. They wanted to kill innocent civilians in order to invade Cuba. JFK said, "Get the hell out of here!" And now look what happened to him. They don't understand state-sponsored terrorism. That is where terrorism comes from. You know what I mean? It's always state-sponsored. These things don't happen just. They develop over time, and it's going back to the Mujahideen, the way they developed the Al Qaeda that turned into ISIS, and they all have links back to the Five Eyes intelligence communities who funded them and trained them in order to deploy them as proxy warriors in order to achieve geopolitical means that they wanted to achieve. And that's really the name of the game. But people are still in a la-la land where they think that the government cares at all about us, in the least. And, like I said, so many people have their vested interest because it is the biggest essential employer in the world, is the U.S. government. and they won't look past or allow themselves to see the truth because of the cognitive dissonance that they have to encounter.
Yeah, and also, how many times have we heard, especially since during the COVID, was like, oh well, my pension, or or I'm going to lose my 401k, or
And there's stocks involved, yes.
right. So
But
that's
look what
another
happened
way.
when I broke that story about the Austin private wealth, right?
Oh, right. Yeah, tell
short
that
stock.
story. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's there's a thing called short selling or put options that people can do, basically betting that a stock's going to go down. Okay. And this happened prior to 9/11. People don't realize this, that there were put options put on these airlines that experienced a gigantic decline in stock. And there's a whole story around this that I'm hoping to actually get to with a thread and article that I'm writing. But so if that stock goes down at a strike, a target to a certain value, then whoever placed that put option there makes tons and tons of money. I mean, it's a windfall. And somebody made millions upon millions of dollars because 9/11 happened, because they timed this put option on United Airlines and a couple other ones prior to it happening. And they have probabilities that they can look at, say, what is the probability that somebody would actually do this without having knowledge of what was going to happen?
Right.
So Austin Private Wealth, it's a small a firm that's in Austin, and they submitted a 13F, which is a filing they have to do to show all their holdings. And I had a source that worked with a Bloomberg terminal, and he noticed that this particular firm placed like a 20,000. It was something like what was it exactly? 2 million or something like that shorts on a DJT stock prior to the assassination, right?
Right.
And they'd never done any amendments in their whole life, meaning that they basically claimed that, oh, that was a mistake. We didn't mean to do that, so we went back and amended it. But do you really think that if he was killed and that dropped down, they would have had, it was hundreds of millions of dollars that was predicted could have happened.
Right.
So people want to say that, yeah, it probably was a mistake, but I'm not buying. I'm not buying.
Not anymore.
These Wall Street guys, it's basically legalized corruption that they're able to engage in, and they pump these stocks, and they want to short sell them. And then with Austin Private Wealth, and then there was the CrowdStrike that happened right after that.
Oh, right,
So
exactly.
somebody placed a $2 million bet that CrowdStrike was going to plummet the day before it happened. Okay.
I know.
But they just write it off as, it's just something that happened. Right. But people need to look at these things as not isolated events. Somebody knew Trump was going to be, the attempt was going to be on his life. Somebody knew there was going to be a major blackout with CrowdStrike. And I think that was a beta test of what's to come. You know what I mean? Because if one company, and CrowdStrike, people forget as well, CrowdStrike was the company that the DNC hired to examine the servers whenever they said that Russia hacked them.
Right.
The FBI had never looked at the servers. So they based their opinion on Russia hacking into their servers. They based it on what CrowdStrike had told them. So they never, think about that. The FBI never took the servers and did their forensic examination, which they always do. They would come and take my hard drive and do an examination, all right? But the DNC said, no, we don't want you guys doing that, which is shady in itself. We have CrowdStrike, which is this company prior to that was relatively unknown and wasn't really turning gigantic profits. They weren't a big company. Since then, they've grown to one of the most important IT companies in the world. Right. And the FBI said, oh, we'll just believe what they said, and that it was Russia who had hacked in. And I posted a video of a Senate hearing with, what's his name, Comey? Was it Comey or one of the FBI guys? It was shortly after that hack had happened. Right. And it's clear as day. He says, look, we never examined them. We requested to examine them several times, but they never gave it to us, so we just took their word for it. So that whole thing is based, all these things, CrowdStrike, all these things are connected disparately, but you have to know the full story to really put it together. Thank you very much. Yeah, you can find me on X at joshwalkos.com, so JOSHWALKOS. And then I do have a Substack. It's wethefree.substack.com, and you can subscribe for free, or if you want to sign up for a yearly membership, I'm not going to stop you. But, I do appreciate you inviting me on here, and we are of one mind when it comes to this sort of thing, and we need to find like-minded individuals, and don't be afraid to speak out. That's my message to your audience. Like, use your voice. I'm just a normal dude. I don't have any expertise in this. I just do a lot of reading and research, and you can do that too and become a citizen journalist and expose the truth to the masses, so to speak.